Okay, so Unit 10.1, Part 3, we left off with the structure of government under Stalin, and now we're going to talk about Stalin's propaganda campaign, because as we're going to see, Stalin's kind of the man when it comes to totalitarianism. We're going to see some try to emulate him and not quite get there, and others, go really far with it. And so, Stalin's propaganda's purpose was to glorify work to the Soviet people and encourage worker productivity. And he is going to really, with this propaganda, try to get people excited and really make them love him. And people are going to love Stalin, although, as we talked about, people are starving. So his propaganda is going to be really successful at getting the workers involved, getting people to love him. And so Stalin's really going to use the new technology to promote his propaganda. Newspapers like the Pravda, which means the truth, films, radio broadcasts are all going to emphasize socialist achievements and capitalist plots. And so Stalin is really only going to let you know what he wants you to know and dismiss or make other things seem evil. Sergei Eisenstein, 1898 to 1914, talked about a little bit before, is like the quintessential patriotic filmmaker under Stalin. He is going to make movies to glorify Stalin. He is going to put him in his movies in places he never was to glorify him. Like, he's going to put him in all these positions that historically Stalin was never at, but just to make him look glorified and awesome. And writers and artists are going to be expected to glorify Stalin and the state, and their work will be closely monitored. So a lot of censorship here. A lot of only what Stalin wants you to know. Stalin's even going to persecute religion. If you remember, we talked about communism is atheist and Stalin is an atheist. And so Stalin hopes to turn the churches into museums of atheism. And so the buildings will exist, but they will become museums to house, like, everything is about the state and everything is about Stalin. And so there are some benefits for workers under Stalin. So if you're in the city, it's kind of good for you, although we've talked about if you're the peasants, it is not really good for you. But under Stalin, we're going to see old age pensions increase, free medical services, free education, and daycare centers for children. Education is going to become key to improving one's position because those specialized skills and technical education are really sought after to keep this industrialization that we've seen moving. Many Russians are going to start to see themselves as building the world's first socialist society, while capitalism crumbled during the Great Depression elsewhere. So we, like that inflation in Germany and the Great Depression in the United States, you're going to see the communists saying we're creating this communist paradise, while everywhere else capitalism and democracy and those things aren't working. And so the USSR is actually going to attract many disillusioned Westerners to communism in the 1930s. There's actually going to be like these big tours that Stalin, is going to put on. And of course, on these tours, you're only going to see like the 10 great things that are going on. They're going to keep you away from all of those poor peasants and everything. But it does disillusion a lot of Westerners to this is the way that things. And so for the question of women, because AP Euro likes to follow women throughout history, so women in Russia, and we're going to see women, later in Italy and Germany and kind of compare the two. But the women in Russia, the Russian Revolution is going to immediately proclaim complete equality of rights for women. So in the 1920s, divorce and abortion will be made readily available to women. And women were urged by the state to work outside the home. We're going to see this is different in other totalitarian regimes. And liberate themselves sexually, whatever that may mean for them. Many women are going to be able to work as professionals in universities. However, they're still expected to do household chores and off hours, as Soviet men considered home and children women's responsibilities. So they get all of this other, but they're still expected to have those household duties. Men continue to monopolize the best jobs, and rapid change in economic hardship is going to lead to actually many broken families at this time. But that's women in Russia. You'll see the contrast when we move forward. And so Stalin, now faced with birthing this new communist nation, wanted to be an example for all, has the question, how do you make this continue when not everyone likes it? We know there's groups of people that don't like it. We know there's groups of people starving. And so we're going to see the time period called the Great Terror, very much like the Reign of Terror in France, as it lasts from 1934 to 1938. And it's going to be first directed against peasants after 1929. Terror was used increasingly on leading communists And really, this is the paranoia or Stalin's fear of being taken out. Like, so who could most challenge trying to take him out? Remember, he's already had that power struggle with Trotsky, and he's very paranoid about people trying to come in and usurp his power. So against leading communist, powerful administrators and ordinary people, often for no apparent reason, and that's where that paranoia comes in. So what we're going to see is just like the reign of terror in France, we're going to have lots and lots of arrests. The Great Terror will result in 8 million arrests, and then proceeds on to show trials that were used to eradicate enemies of the people, usually people that have left the party for one reason or another. And so they go and they're going to charge them, but really it's just like, well, just like it sounds, it's a show trial. They've already found them guilty, so the trial is just for show. In the late 1930s, dozens of old Bolsheviks who have been Lenin's closest followers. So Stalin's thinking, like maybe they think that Trotsky should have been the man to step up. Like maybe they don't completely believe in me leading this charge. He's very, very paranoid. I mean, kind of like Robespierre that we saw in the French Revolution, are going to be tried and executed. And then we're also going to see purges where 40,000 army officers, so the upper elite of the army, were expelled or liquidated. Because remember, those would be the people that we saw these military revolutions. It's usually the government that comes and takes down a new a military that comes and takes down a new government right away. And so he wants to get rid of those people in power. But it's going to severely weaken the USSR in World War II. Because of Stalin's fear of the army turning on him, we're going to see that when they get into World War II, there are no officers to lead these men. And so this is going to be a big problem. We're also going to see millions of citizens were killed or die in gulags, which are forced labor camps, or simply disappear. So you can only imagine, those are just the people that weren't found. This is sometimes called the Gulag Archipelago, if you remember that term, like archipelago, like a group, like Japan, a grouping of islands. So it said that there's this book by this survivor of these labor camps that says, like, you can pretty much step from one labor camp to another labor camp all the way across Russia at this time. And so the Great Terror is going to be what Stalin institutes to try to keep, he's very paranoid, keep anybody from trying to usurp him or turn on him. So now that we've covered communism in the Soviet Union and Stalin, we now need to move to our two fascist countries, so Italy and then Germany. And so there's going to be some, compare and contrast here as we move through. But so fascist Italy, Roman number 3 right here. First, let's talk about the causes for the rise of fascism in Italy, just as we talked about the causes of the rise of communism in the Soviet Union. So in the early 20th century, Italy was a liberal state with civil rights and a constitutional monarchy. So that's where we've left off with them. Victor Emmanuel III, who is pictured here, is still the king in Italy, where we've left off. And if you remember, the Versailles Treaty in 1919 had taken place, and Italian nationalists were still very angry, just as we're going to see Germany's angry at the Treaty of Versailles, or that we've already talked about, that Italy did not receive any Austrian or Ottoman territory, that Italia Irredenta that we talked about, that land that they had been promised in World War I, or Germany's African colonies they had been promised. And if you remember when we talked about the Treaty of Versailles, the Prime Minister Vittorio Orlando had angrily stomped out of the meeting, left the Paris Peace Conference before it was completed. And then on top of that, we're going to have a depression in 1919. So not the Great Depression, but a depression in Italy that will cause nationwide strikes and class tension. And then we're also going to see that our wealthy classes, seeing, Russia going communist, is fearful, like we said, because communism's manifesto is to spread worldwide, are fearful of communist revolution, and they're looking for a strong anti-communist leader because communism would hurt them, the upper classes. So we have all of this going on. So by 1921, revolutionary socialists, conservatives, and property owners were all opposed to liberal parliamentary government. And so fascism in Italy eventually will become a combination of conservative authoritarianism and modern totalitarianism. Although not as extreme as Russia with Stalin that we just talked about. Like Stalin's like the man, like I said when we say totalitarianism. Lenin is not going to quite be him. But we'll see that as we move towards Germany, we'll see some more extreme totalitarianism if you're going to get a little bored. Here with Mussolini as we move into fascism in Italy. So before we get completely into the rise of Mussolini, I'd like to remind you that you can look back at that chart comparing fascism and communism at any point here to help you. That chart will really help guide you to see how each of these individuals is proceeding with this totalitarian regimes in each area. But so Benito Mussolini, 1883 to 1945, is going to rise to power, and he'll gain the title of Il Duce, which means the chief. Although he was the editor of a socialist newspaper, he was at heart a nationalist. And we're going to see that he will very shortly after coming to power kind of lose those socialist ties. And so Mussolini is going to be responsible for organizing the fascist party. He is going to combine socialism, at least in the early years, which he is going to strip off later, as I just said, and nationalism, because he's a nationalist at heart. He is going to reach for territorial expansion, benefits for workers, and land reform for peasants. The party, though, that gets its name, the Fascist Party, was named after fasces, and those were the rods carried by the imperial Roman officials as symbols of power. And you can see those here, and those will become a symbol of the Fascist Party in Italy. Initially, his party is going to fail to prevail because of competition from the well-organized socialists, but eventually, as we're going to see, no spoiler alert, if it failed all the way, we wouldn't have this lecture, but eventually, the Fascist Party will prevail. In 1920, Mussolini will gain support of the conservative classes and the frightened middle class, the middle class frightened of all of this communism, for anti-socialist rhetoric and abandon his socialist programs. And this is where we're going to see that shift to complete fascism and also his nationalistic heart here. And so part of the reason that Mussolini is able to prevail and, take this charge of the group or the state is most important in those nationalistic ties is he is going to form kind of a group of, for lack of a better word, of thugs. It's not the secret police you'd think of yet, but they are called the Black Shirts or Squadristi. And they are a paramilitary force, and they are going to begin attacking communist, socialist, and other enemies of the fascist program. Mussolini is actually going to be, he is older than Hitler, and he's going to be kind of a mentor of someone that Hitler looks up to here at the beginning of his reign. We'll see how that changes later. But later, Hitler's brown shirts are going to follow the example of Mussolini's black shirts. And the purpose of the black shirts, really is just to terrify or to try to, as thugs, put down anybody who's opposition. However, this is going to significantly undermine the stability of the government because they're terrorizing people of other political parties. So you're really not going to have a stable, dual party system because people are going to be afraid to come forward with different ideas. And so how does Mussolini go from terrorizing to taking power? Well, on October 1922, Mussolini is going to lead what is known as the March on Rome and take power. Because remember, we have all kinds of problems going on in Italy. We have the Depression, all of those causes we just talked about, and it's complete chaos. And Mussolini is going to take advantage of this and demand resignation of the existing government and demand his own appointment by the king. So he's going to, because the king is still there, Emmanuel III is still sitting there in power. And Mussolini, as great totalitarian leaders are going to do, is going to say, I have the answer. I am your answer. Put me in power and I can fix all of this. And so large groups of fascists are going to march on Rome to threaten the king to accept Mussolini's demands. Now, I don't think Emmanuel III was really threatened, but he has a choice. He can pick the fascist side or he can pick the socialist side or things are going to end up in a civil war, which he really wants to prevent. So the king, as the king, he's going to say, I can always, I am always here, and what I can do instead of a civil war is just take a side. And so he's going to pick the fascist side, but the king, I want you to know, is always going to be in the background to keep Mussolini in check a bit. So we're going to see, in contrast to Stalin or Hitler, that Mussolini is not going to be as totalitarian as he would wish to be. Although that was his intention, we're going to see that he never lives up to that of Stalin or later Hitler. And so what happens is Emmanuel III, like I said, picks the fascist side, and the government is going to collapse. Mussolini will receive the right to organize a new cabinet or his own government. However, King's still in the background, and King Victor Emmanuel III is going to give him dictatorial powers for 1 year to end the nation's social unrest. And it's at this time that Mussolini becomes the youngest prime minister in Italian history. And so this is how he rises to power, with this march on Rome. And so the first thing that Mussolini is going to tackle now that he has this new power is he's going to first try to organize the economy. And this is where we get the creation of a corporate state, also called a syndicalist, which means just really group, corporate system. And it will become the economic basis for Italian fascism. So it's really going to be kind of like capitalism in service to the state. So everything is in service to the state or the Italian nation. This is where we get the quote, everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. And so he's trying to get all of the interest in the economy to work together in harmony for service to the state. And so he's trying to get everyone to march together at the same beat, to march in step. So there's still personal ownership, so a little bit of that capitalism, but you're trying to march in step. So whatever you do, even though individually it needs to work in order or harmony of the state. And so this is where we're going to see like his promotion is to blend together all of the interests and to have class transcending harmony. He's going to, by 1928, all of the independent labor unions will be organized into government-controlled syndicates, establish organizations of workers and employers, and he's going to outlaw strikes and walkouts, because of course those aren't in service to the state. He's going to create corporations which coordinated activities between worker and employer syndicates or groups, and the authority is going to come down from the top. Unlike socialist corporate states where workers made the decisions, we're going to see the state makes the decision here. So he's going to say this is collaboration for the state to make Italy a better place. So it's at this point that Mussolini is going to create a dictatorship or a corporate state, continuing with that theme, under which the right to vote will be severely limited, and all candidates for the Italian parliament will be selected by the fascist party. So there's really just one party. Fascists are going to put fascists only into the candidacy. We're going to see that the government is ruled by decree, and the squadronistas, or the black shirts, are going to be set in charge of enforcing it. And we get this mantra of the black shirts at this time, "Mana frego," which translates to "I don't give a damn." So they really don't give a damn in what they have to do to try to enforce the decree of the government. One of their favorite ways to get people to conform, the black shirts, one of their favorite ways to get people to conform was to tie them to a tree and pour a pint or two of castor oil. If you've ever seen, like, you know, kind of like it's like lubricate but nasty. Used to be kind of an old school like medicine. They thought it solved everything, but just shove castor oil down their throats to kind of lubricate it and then make them swallow a live frog or toad. So if you can think about like the nastiness of his life. And so that was, I mean, not, you know, like in Russia, nothing compared to what was going on in Russia with the secret police there, but also, you know, enough to terrorize those that would go against the state or against Mussolini. And so we're going to also see dedicated fascists put in control of schools. I mean, why? Because you want to get the kids trained early. That's one of the parts of a totalitarian regime, is you want the kids on board early with this state first kind of mentality. And so teachers are actually going to have to take an oath of fascism, and children are taught at this time period that the great days of Italy started that the day that the March on Rome happened in 1922, or the day Mussolini took power, and that it is the start of Italy's revival into becoming great again like the Roman Empire. And it also reinforces to the children that Mussolini is the only guy that can lead them to greatness, or Il Duce, the chief. He is the only guy that can lead us there. And so getting the children on board early. This is where we get the fascist youth, the government seeking to regulate leisure time of the people as well, and also going to get the fascist youth movement, or the Balita. I don't have time to show you the video here, but I'll try to throw some stuff on Edmodo for you. We're also going to see that the government sought to regulate labor unions. and also the Dopplavaro program after work, so social activities for the working class. So these programs focused on Italianness, or what it is to be Italian. It's also going to reinforce for boys, to mold them that it's natural for them to be a warrior, and that war is to the male as childbearing is to the female. And so we're going to see later, as we talk about the comparison of women in Italy versus Russia or the Soviet Union, that male are meant to be warriors to make a great Italy, and female are meant to produce these children. That becomes their job, and we'll talk about his program with women in just a little bit on number 7. We're going to see, however, that even with all of these programs in this dictatorship of Mussolini, that Italy will never truly become a totalitarian regime, because Mussolini will never become all-powerful. We still have, King Emmanuel sitting there behind the scenes, kind of with his thumb on Mussolini, because he had granted him this power. We see that Mussolini is going to fail in his attempt to fascitize Italy or Italian society by controlling leisure time. So he's very unlike Stalin or Hitler in this aspect, is he never quite gets there. He never gets it done. The old power structure of conservatives, the military, and the church remains intact, which is one of these reasons, because Mussolini never attempted to purge conservative classes or to have, this great purge or getting rid of them. And he propagandized and controls labor, but left big business to regulate itself, so he leaves that little bit of capitalism there. So we're going to see, in stark contrast to Stalin and Hitler, he's never going to quite get there. And also no land reform is going to occur. He also did not establish ruthless police state. Nothing compared to the millions that are going to disappear or be killed under Stalin, or all of the peasants that are going to die. Only 23 political prisoners will be executed between 1926 and 1944. So I know I'm making this sound like a bad thing. It's not, but when talking in totalitarian regime context, he is not going to get where some of our other individuals from this lecture did. Radical laws will not be passed until 1938, and savage persecution of Jews did not occur until late in World War II, when Italy was under German Nazi control. So we're going to see really only 4,000 arrested, and this is kind of the time where Hitler's going to be like, Mussolini was my role model mentor, he never quite got there. So we're going to see that Mussolini doesn't quite get it done. Nothing like what happened that we just talked about in the Soviet Union, or that we're getting ready to talk about in Germany. Another stark contrast that we need to talk about between the Soviet Union and Italy is that in Italy, unlike Russia's more modern approach to gender issues, Italy's social structure is going to emphasize a traditional role for women, and that is their role to have kids. This, however, is going to be a similarity between between Italy and Nazi Germany, however. So we're going to see that divorce was abolished, so the opposite as we've seen in Russia, and women were told to stay home and procreate. So this is that kind of need to know women stuff. If you were asked the difference between totalitarian regimes in this time period, you may be asked about the differences between the role of women. As I said, divorce was abolished and women told to stay home and procreate, or to have lots and lots of babies, and this is going to be called the Battle of the Births. And we're going to see this is one of the things, not just one of the things that Mussolini does that puts him kind of back, or puts him in favor with the church, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we wrap up Italy. So in an attempt to promote marriage, which the church also liked, Mussolini is going to decree a special tax on bachelors in 1934. So meaning you have to pay extra money if you are not married by this time, if you're not married and ready to start pumping out babies. And women are with more kids are going to be glorified. We're going to see that in 1933, Mussolini is going to meet with 93 mothers and have a big party or a celebration for these women, because this is the example of what he want women to be like in Italy. And these 93 moms together have produced 1,300 kids. So that equals out, so kind of Duggarish here, over 13 kids each. And these is what he would say are examples of good Italian women, because Mussolini wants more population. He thinks the more population, the greater power that Italy will be. He's like, we're only 37 million people at this time. So who's going to be scared of that? And he states by 1950 he wants 60 million people. And how's he going to do this? By pushing women's role to have kids. So to do that, that would mean that each family would need about 5 kids per family to reach that target number. We're going to see, however, this is a huge failure because population is going to grow, but not because of Mussolini's Battle of the Births program. It's because people are living longer, not because of the birth rate. The birth rate's actually going to fall in Italy between 1927 and 1934. And then by 1938, women are really going to be limited by law to a maximum of 10% of better paying jobs in industry and government. So we're going to see very sharp contrast here between the Soviet Union and Italy in terms of women. Okay, so now let's talk about accomplishments under Mussolini, and then we'll talk about the legacy under Mussolini, or the failures. So first, accomplishments. Start with the good news. Internal improvements were made, such as electrification and road building. So really this you could just classify as modernizing. It's even said that Mussolini made the trains run on time. So this is like that orderly function of totalitarianism. A more efficient government at the municipal or city level was created. There's a suppression of the mafia, which was especially strong in southern Italy and Sicily. So he suppresses that to keep that from, rising against his totalitarian regime or fascism. We're also going to see improvements of the justice system. Except, of course, if you were considered an enemy of the state, then the justice system wasn't improved for you. We also have the question that Mussolini has to ask himself there, will I work with or against the Catholic Church? And he is going to choose to work with. Because he doesn't want people's loyalty divided between the state and their loyalty to the church. Remember, we've had problems within the church since unification of Italy. So this is where we're going to get Mussolini's Lateran Pact of 1929, which is going to result in reconciliation with the papacy. He wants to, like everyone, to love him. He wants the church to legitimize him. And so he done some things we've already talked about, like that baby stuff. That sits well with the church. He's against contraception, which sits well with the church. And banning divorce that he had done when we talked about the role of women, is something that the church likes. And so then in the Vatican, he's going to recognize as a tiny independent state, and they are going to receive $92 million for that land that had been seized. We talked about with the land that had been confiscated, and so the Vatican's going to be made kind of its own little independent nation here. And so in return, Pope Pius XII is going to recognize the legitimacy of the Italian state, or of fascism. And so all of these are accomplishments or successes of Mussolini, but now we need to talk about the legacy and or failures. And so fascist failures, we're going to see with all of that terrorizing of other parties or things that Mussolini does not consider correct for the state, that Italian democracy is destroyed. Terrorism will become a state policy because of Mussolini and fascism. Poor industrial growth will be due to militarism and colonialism. And so, really spending all of that money on armament and trying to go out and gain some colonies. And then disastrous wars are going to result from Mussolini's attempt to recapture or revive what was once the Roman Empire and his imperialistic glories of ancient Rome. And so we're going to see that this ends up being a negative legacy here. And then, of course, we're going to see, as we move into this next part of the lecture, that then we're going to get this guy involved by the name of Hitler. And you know what happens there. This is going to mess kind of everything up. And Italy, things are not going to go so well. And if you didn't already know, Mussolini, things aren't going to go so well for him. And we're going to talk about this later too, gets hanged upside down at a gas station during World War II. He and his mistress are going to end up dying at a gas station surrounded by a mob of people who are mad at him. And so, and he's not the only prime minister that has problems with mistresses, although I don't think another one has not been hung outside of a gas station. The prime minister of Italy recently had a problem with 17-year-old mistresses, and he's like 75, and so like in some trouble with a 17-year-old dancer, but that's a side note. And on that note, I don't think there's much more to tell you about Italy right now. We will move into Nazi Germany.